And now, BD. What is going on, BD? Thank you very much for coming on and having this topic in mind. I appreciate it. And please let everybody know where they can find your stuff and get in contact with you.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. We're going to have a lot of fun this evening with various rabbit holes in the sky, I like to think of them. I am on X. I am on Instagram. I have a link tree, which should be below. And my website is strangebutTrueCrime.com. And it really is strange and true.
I love it. I love it. Awesome. Yeah, actually, I forgot. Yeah, we are live. All the links should be in there already, or I should have. I'm pretty sure I set that up. So I guess, BD, I mean, again, this was your topic. Who's hijacking the cosmos?
Cosmos. Mm-hmm. The original title, it strayed quite away from that. The original title was Asteroids and in Greek mythology. And it was that way for several days until I took a huge detour in my research and came up with some things that I thought were very, very important to bring to light. And I really didn't want to do a whole show just presenting asteroid positions in crime charts and how they relate to the crime at hand, because that could get excessive after a while. But it's a fascinating pivot that I made, and I think that it will be beneficial for people to know it. And that's why I changed the topic to who's hijacking the cosmos, because I think I figured out who is doing that, how they are doing that, and why. And it all starts with the asteroids that I was beginning to do for this show. So I'll just go a little bit into that. I will be very grateful for Headless's contribution to explaining some of the mythological characters I'm going to go into. Asteroids are basically planetoids. They're small bodies of matter that appear in mostly between the orbit of Mars and Jupiter. They are not distant like the stars. They are within our solar system. They're basically chunks of Earth, metals. Some of them are just huge blocks of ice. And they go in certain patterns of orbit. They have belonged to certain belts. One huge one is the Apollo belt, which comprises many other asteroids, that some of which we'll talk about. And the interesting thing is planets represent qualities, characteristics, and experiences in a person's life. When you look at their astrology chart, that's what the planets do. They are descriptors. They are like the characters in a drama. The horoscope is the stage. The planets are the characters in the drama. And they play out through the person's life, various energies and incidents, qualities of life. The asteroids do the same thing as the planets, except they're smaller. They're much more specific. They are oriented specifically to the myth that they are named after. And that's what caught me, is how do you name this? And it ends up working out in someone's horoscope that it tells you these qualities of that specific person. And it does. And I've seen it time and again, and I'm going to give examples. But that is what drew me in. So anyway, there are over 1.2 million known asteroids, because like I said, some of them are just chunks of rock floating in space, orbiting the Earth or orbiting the sun. But they are being discovered and identified by science since 1801 was the first discovery of them. And it's an interesting trajectory how they were named and how subsequently their characteristics were found to bear out in people's horoscopes, and especially in my case, in the horoscopes of crimes, because that's basically what I do. I do crime charts, not so much natal birth charts. Anyway, so I have been doing astrology for over 20 years, but I only recently started to learn the asteroids because they were not part of my training, which was classical astrology, which came from the ancients, not modern astrology. We didn't do asteroids. I didn't really want to learn them because I knew there were thousands of them, and I didn't feel like I would be able to manage that. But I started learning them a few months ago and applying them in crime charts, and I'm so blown away by the results and the accuracy of these bodies in space that now I pretty much rely on them. And I thought it would be interesting, and I talked to Nick about how they come from mythology, the same way the planets did. The planets basically are named after Roman gods and goddesses. Mars, the god of war, represents violence and action in a chart. It can represent gunfire, stabbing, a violent action, a murder. In the same way, Venus, goddess of, Aphrodite or Venus, goddess of beauty, really in a chart represents what we like, what we want. It's money, it's jewelry, it's possessions, and so on with Jupiter. So they all represent energies. And so as the planets do, so do the asteroids, but more specifically.
Well, there is one thing to note real quick. They're going back and forth between Roman and Greek. So with the planets, you've got all Roman gods. And with these asteroids, there's several different versions in here. And I think that's important because the Roman gods are slightly different from the Greek gods. And, once you get into it more, you can see that.
Yes. I noticed that I started to take a mythology class a couple of weeks ago. And what I noticed right away was how fluid the meanings of these were. I mean, this happened in this situation, but according to another historian, it really was this way. And there are various variations in the stories of these mythical characters, so that it depends who you kind of got your information from. I know mostly what I was reading was from Hesiod, the Theogony of Hesiod. Right. And that was that. It was this way, but it was that way. And of course, over hundreds and hundreds of years of word of mouth, stuff is going to get changed and turned around.
A big part of the mythology is that there is a aspect of poetry, right? And in poetry, you find where these characters can start to fit together. And it's in the lines and how they put them together that they fit into these myths. And really, we lose all that if we don't go back to the original Greek. But you can still find a lot of those stray threads over and over again between the Roman system and the Greek system too.
Yes, it was interesting. It also, when I just started to study it, as I said a few weeks ago, I was right off the bat saw the room for confusion. First of all, they're unfamiliar names. I mean, I had to look up how to pronounce each one of them because I didn't want to be butchering all these names. But secondly, they're fluid characters. Something happened to this one, but didn't happen in another situation. So I thought, wow, whoever becomes expert at this really has something on the ball, because it is very complex, multi-layered storytelling with a lot of twists and turns. But that's also the attraction of it. What draws me, and this is where I made a huge detour in my research. I'm not at that point yet to talk about it, but what drew me was how on earth can something, a rock in space, be named after a mythical character, and then in a chart be found to reveal the characteristics of a situation or a person that the myth is talking about. And I'll go into that. I have a bunch of examples, but I started to have to know, what was the system of nomenclature? When were they discovered? Who sponsored the discovery? Big hint. So I detoured, went into that and got to where we're going to go. But anyway, I want to go into some of the specifics of the myths that we have talked about in recent podcasts. We've talked about smiley face killers. We did 4 episodes on that, and I found numerous asteroids in the crime charts of those missing young men that were extremely descriptive of what happened, of the environment they were in when they went missing and ended up murdered. The first one I'm going to talk about is Bacchus. I think Bacchus also would have been Dionysus. If you want to tell us something about Bacchus.
Sure. So Bacchus, god of wine, is most associated with sort of fertility cycles. And he was also a god that was torn apart and then rose again, right? And what we see even in the symbol right there is that cross symbol. And a lot of people have suggested that Bacchus was an inspiration for the character of Christ Jesus. And so similar dates and in the rebirth, similar dates and all this stuff. And he was son of Zeus, which is, the top god of the Greek pantheon. So there's a lot of different ideas going on in just that symbol. And I think it's also important to note that John Dee sort of pioneered what we know of as the modern astrological symbols, right? And in his Ars Hieroglyphica, he puts all of them together in a single symbol, and then he tears them apart and says how they fit together.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that Ars Hieroglyphica, you start to understand exactly why they give these symbols to these different astrological signs.
Right. That's a good observation, because I looked at a whole bunch of the glyphs for these asteroids, and saw very few with the crucifix, and noticed it in Bacchus. There's one or two other ones that I saw it in.
Was Bacchus anything that came up when you did do SFK?
Oh, yeah.
See, now that I find that weird, only because now I didn't even think of it. Maybe you said it and I didn't even catch it.
No, I did. I had
the god of like drinking, like
2 or 3 charts of the guys, 2 or 3 of the victims at least, which had Bacchus prominently featured in the chart. It was either rising or it was in a stress aspect to other planets. And in the way we interpret Bacchus in astrology is excessive partying, drinking, drugging. We emphasize the party aspect, the god of wine. And all these men were out in bars, or they were at parties. And a number of them were drunk, or it was said that they were intoxicated when they really weren't. But Bacchus was prominent in their charts, and it was matching the situations that each one of them had been in. So I know I talked about Bacchus. The big one that came out in our last, the 4th episode of SFK series, was Apollo. When I did the incorporation chart of Oracle Corporation, and Apollo, which is on the left here, was, I think it's hard to explain. I tried to explain it in layman's terms, because it was so remarkably featured in that chart. It dominated the entire chart, and that I had said it had to be done. The chart had to be planned by AI or a brilliant astrologer to feature it exactly the way it was configured in that chart, because Apollo was the seer, the source of all information that channeled through the Delphic Oracle, and the giver of prophecy, of information to create prophecy through Pythia. And Apollo was also in the mission statement of, I believe, Oracle Corporation, who took information. They were a software giant. They took information from the cloud. They were the most advanced in cloud technology. Took information, funneled it through to be created into software to enable decisions to be made, actions to be made, to disseminate information or to disseminate misinformation. And that's why Apollo was so impressive in that chart. It was, and it fit into the chart of Oracle Corporation. I thought that was deliberately named. There was no random naming. Oracle Corporation for no reason. Anyway, the symbol of Apollo is interesting because it is the inversion of the symbol for the sign Leo, which is ruled by the sun, Leo being the sun god, and the dot goes into the center of the circle when you see the circle of the sun, there's a dot in the middle of that. And this curly thing is Leo upside down, and Apollo being, a leader.
Well, I think what we're seeing there is the lyre, right? So he was the god of music, and you can see sort of that lyre shape right there if you imagine there's a harp in the middle. So I think the inversion is sort of like Leo is like a fist, right? And so Apollo is more like harmonizing that sort of energy. And so I think going back to the astrological signs, the stage, as it were, these are all the elemental aspects. So you've got earth, fire, water, and air. And having these as they move through those different stages are going to give, during the different times of the year, are going to also reflect one of those elemental aspects as they're moving through in relationship to the earth.
Right. It's interesting you say that, because the Delphic Oracle would not be active in the winter months. It was only during the warm months. So people didn't go to the Oracle for, I guess it was probably from December through February or something like that. It had to be warm out. So that's interesting. Leo is a fire sign.
Right.
Ruling warmth. So we can go on to, I think I did Bacchus for SFK, and Oh yeah, that one would be for Tisiphone, one of the Furies. I think Tisiphone, if you would enlighten me, had listed Tisiphone was like the nastiest Fury. She was like the most evil one, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm seeing a lot of the Scorpio at the bottom of that. So there is that aspect. But also the Furies were sent out by Hades, who would deploy them based off of injury you might cause to your family. And the Furies are this idea of revenge, right? Maybe not nemesis necessarily, but more like directed revenge. And so I think in this regards, you really kind of get that idea of that Scorpio coming back to bite you. And, you know, I'm not necessarily sure which one did what, but I know for a fact that the three Furies, everything the Greeks did were in trinities, right? So they all have these Trinitarian aspects. You have the three fates, the three Furies, and then the nine muses were divided up into threes, you know? So each one of these, and even Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades represent like the main trinity of the Olympian gods. So,
yeah, this symbol, the Scorpio, is prominent, and the above, just stopping before the curved arrow, that is the glyph for the planet Uranus, which was the Papa Titan of the beginning, you know, the husband, so to speak, of Gaia. His symbol is there, and then you have Scorpio below. What I got from that is looking at it from an astrological viewpoint. In the crime chart, Tisiphone, or they're calling it Uranus here, is what you just said. It's retaliation and revenge, and in a violent way, in a very spiteful way. And that is how we read it in the crime chart. And as a matter of fact, Tisiphone was very prominent in the chart of the Idaho Four. There was something in those murders that was very vengeful. It was personal. It was resentment. And I think I spoke of that when we did that show months ago. But that was an example of the vengefulness. Also predominant, we talked some weeks ago, did a show on the Black Dahlia. Tisiphone was very prominent in that crime chart. She was murdered by a man who was out of his mind with rage and resentment for her. She had scorned him, and he didn't take it well. And my theory was he was the one who killed her, although it's on paper, it's an unsolved murder, but I think that was what happened to her. And we talked about that in the show. Also, Tisiphone again shows up in some of the smiley face killers incidents in Ohio, where they suspect a gang was involved, either a drug gang or there were some bad drug deals, and somebody was very angry and needed to get back at the victim. So those are some examples of Tisiphone prominent in those charts. And okay, if we go to the next one, I think I have Nessus in there. Yeah. Oh, it doesn't have its name, but that's Nessus, has the N, which is helpful. Nessus, I think, wasn't he the centaur who tried to take Deianira across the river, and he tried to attack her or something? Nessus was the centaur. I forget whose son he was.
There were a lot of the centaurs that had this sort of idea of like kidnapping human women. And what's funny is the opposite would be Chiron, who Chiron would give knowledge.
Chiron was good, yeah.
Right. And so that sort of distinction there, and how Hercules kind of threw off the balance. You know, in his story with the centaurs, he killed all of them with his, poisoned arrows.
Right.
And it wasn't necessarily intentional, but there was this aspect of the centaurs being so powerful that they couldn't really be overcome by anything other than this poison. And I think Nessus was, one of the prominent features in that as well.